All right, hello, my name is Blake Clark. This is a presentation on leadership in rural Appalachian schools for EDG 606 here at Northern Kentucky University. So, talking about Appalachia, let's first define what that is. So, Appalachia is made up of 423 counties across 13 states and spans 206,000 square miles for southern New York to northern Mississippi. So, this graph you see on the right is put together by the Appalachian Regional Commission. So, this is what they define as being the Appalachian region or what falls under their purview. Appalachian Regional Commission was founded under the JFK administration to specifically look at this region, the poverty that exists here, and to look at ways to have some progress and what can be done. So when we talk about Appalachia, or when I'm talking about Appalachia in this presentation, this is the region I'm bringing to mind. Now, the actual Appalachian Range, of course, extends farther north. You got the Catskills in western New York, the Berkshires in western Massachusetts, all the way up into Maine. But when we say Appalachian, a lot of times we're talking about this kind of Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, Eastern Tennessee region. I think in this region we find a very particular culture and different problems and issues that we might find when we go a little farther north. So this is a region with 26.4 million residents, spanning a good part of the eastern United States. So when we're thinking about Appalachia, what is it? Let's understand it a little better. So the Appalachian region is placed in American history as one of the rugged frontiersmen, fiercely independent mountain communities, and unfortunately economic underdevelopment. This is something we see in a lot of mountain communities across the world. It's largely due to the rough terrain. It's hard to get goods and services into these places. It's hard to get things out. Kind of hampers trade. And this is unfortunately something we see across the world in any kind of mountain community, especially in a time pre-automobile or even as rail lines were just first starting to get created here. You're trying to navigate Appalachia on horseback or with a wagon or what have you. It's a real challenge. So the region was a bit hampered from the start just by nature with topography. So we see, early Appalachian America is one of fur traders, frontiersmen, sustenance farming, along with, some diversity, some pockets of freed runaway ex-slaves, not to mention the indigenous people that have been there forever. And while we talk about Appalachia, talk about the misunderstood nature of the place, we usually think, Appalachia, low class, kind of poor white people, which is true, but there's quite a lot of diversity in this region that, maybe is unspoken of. The Hispanic immigrants of this region, the history of African Americans in the region, of course, indigenous communities in this region. So when we think of Appalachia, it's more of a broad spectrum than maybe it first comes to mind. But that being said, with economic underdevelopment, there was one resource in this region that really became one of the backbones of the nation as we expanded through the Industrial Revolution. That was coal. So coal production ramped up just as rail lines got in the area. We were more able to mine and trade that coal out, move it out. Just prior to and after the Civil War, we saw great economic booms in the 20s, 50s, and 70s. And something that surprised me looking into this was American coal production reached a height in 2008. So, all the time I was growing up, I heard coal was doing bad, and it's largely been true. But 2008, American coal production reached a height, pretty surprising to me. Now, that being said, as coal production grows, that doesn't necessarily mean more jobs grow or more employment. So as we went through the 20th century, we saw greater automation that took away a lot of these mining jobs. Not to mention automation, but also alternative energy sources and environmental regulations, which is not necessarily a bad thing. We look forward to the history of progress in the economy of this region. Coal is probably not going to be the answer. As we look at the right here, coal mining employment is at its lowest in the 2020s, and it's been dropping more or less steadily since the 90s, reaching a height, around the late 70s, 80s era. So that being said, coal kind of lent itself to a mono economy in this region, and now the coal is dead and dying. The opportunities are really already kind of gone. So Now that we understand the reason a little better, as far as the economic standpoint, let's take a look at stereotypes. So somebody asks, what do you picture when you think West Virginia? Somebody from West Virginia, somebody from Eastern Kentucky. Just what do you picture in your head there? It's usually something like old Cletus Buckley here on the right from The Simpsons. Um, you know, poor, backwards, lazy, ignorant, set in their ways. They don't value education. We see this throughout media, really all throughout American history. But just a couple notable examples of Beverly Hillbillies, Deliverance, Squidbillies, things maybe not even might take place specifically in Appalachia, but just the depiction of the rural, poor American, kind of pretty similar throughout all these things. When we talk about stereotypes of low class people in the United States, we look at Appalachians. How might this kind of relate to other impoverished communities in the U.S., other lower class communities are struggling from mostly systemic things that are outside of the control, things that have happened externally to them. Is there any relation to the way that media and stereotypes are presented, Appalachians and say, the inner cities who suffer from different forces, but still systemic, economic oppression and things of that nature? And why is that? Why do we often kind of mock these characters with these people, these regions? And then if you're somebody living in these regions that's often miscategorized as stereotypes, how might those stereotypes affect your mindset? How might it affect what you feel is possible for you, your aspirations, your dreams for the future, when you're so often seeing these things, brought to light? You're so often seeing people in your community that you live around put down and called lazy and stupid and all these other things. How might that affect you as you're living in these places? So as we move forward here, poverty, of course, is near synonymous with Appalachia. So the Appalachian Regional Commission uses a classification system that draws upon unemployment rates and income data as well as poverty rates. So this allows for a comparison of Appalachian counties as opposed to counties throughout the nation. And we see that Appalachian Kentucky fares the worst. So just in the state of the 120 counties, 54 fall under the purview of the Appalachian Regional Commission. In 2021, only 3 of those counties were considered transitional, meaning that they're moving towards some economic progress and catching up with the rest of the state. 13 of the counties are at risk, meaning they rank between the worst 10% and 25% of all counties in the United States. And most of Kentucky's Appalachian counties, 38 of which are considered distressed. That's the lowest 10% of counties nationwide. So the point is, we see some of the worst poverty in the nation in Eastern Kentucky and Appalachia. Now, what's the state of education in these places? In Eastern Kentucky, we see that schools are severely underfunded compared to their counterparts in the rest of the state. The Kentucky Center for Economic Policy notes that in 1990, there were a $3,400 per pupil funding gap between Kentucky's wealthiest district and its poorest. That's only grown wider. In 2022, that gap reached $3,900, almost $4,000 difference between funding for the state's wealthiest counties and its poorest. That being said, some interesting data here, also from the Appalachian Regional Commission. 85 or 88.5 rather percent of Appalachian adults 25 to 64 have earned a high school diploma. It's pretty similar to the U.S. average of 88.6. 9.7% of Appalachian adults have an associate degree, which is slightly higher than the 9% of U.S. adults total. 25.3% of Appalachian adults hold a bachelor's degree. The U.S. figure is 32.3%. 30% of Appalachian adults hold a bachelor's degree in STEM. The U.S. figure is 34.8%. And then the share of adults with a bachelor's degree is highest in Northern Appalachia and lower in Central Appalachia, which is something you're going to see as you look into the region. The farther north you get, up into Pennsylvania, and again, depending on how you define Appalachia, into New York, into Massachusetts, Western Massachusetts, even Maine, the farther north you get, the more these numbers are going to look a little better. The farther south, kind of central, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee area, kind of worse they're going to get. But I think what these numbers tell us is this is not a reason that does not value education. The numbers here are pretty close to parity more or less with the rest of the country, keeping in mind the disadvantages that this region has, that the population of this region has. I think it's pretty impressive, these numbers. To say that 25% hold a bachelor's degree compared to the US figure 32.3%, the number's not great, the number could go up, but this is a community that really values education. A lot of times, because education is their only kind of vehicle for opportunity or for upward mobility. So this is not a reason that does not undervalue education. Um, when we look at leadership in these schools, what might educational leadership look like for someone teaching in a rural Appalachian school? So as we talked about in a lot of this class, the journey to becoming a proficient leader starts from within. So we have to try to come from a place of cultural proficiency rather than a place of cultural destructiveness. So that means understanding our communities here, understanding what it is to be, an Appalachian. What does that mean? What's the culture and the history of the region? And not only that, but I think kind of teaching our students what that means. A lot of times, students can get a little caught up in the way Appalachia is presented externally for people who do not live there, do not grow up there. So helping them understand the importance that Appalachia plays in U.S. history, the significance of it, and creating in their mind that this is, a place that's worth having some pride about, worth taking care of, worth working towards progress for. It's not a place to give up on, to move out of, never think of again. And it's creating some sense of pride and community awareness or community involvement in our students. So particularly this is going to be applicable to humanities, social studies majors. I'm a social studies secondary teacher. That's my license. So maybe, on the math side of things, on the science side of things, you might have a little bit more trouble, but even on the science side of things, talk about, what is coal, what is fracking, what is all this stuff. But let's, I think, start with understanding what these communities are and helping our students understand what these communities are to better understand the circumstances, the history, and culture that surrounds them. Advocacy and resources. So as we mentioned in previous slides, Appalachian schools are severely underfunded. Again, there's about $4,000 per student funding gap between the state's richest and poorest counties. So as a leader in our schools, why not teach our students about school funding? How does school funding work? Why is the state so unequitably distributing these funds? And is there anything we can do about it? What ways can the community advocate for more equitable treatment? Can they reach out to our elected officials? Can we organize? Can we petition? And is there any other regions that have faced similar troubles like the Appalachia has? What have they done to kind of make some progress there? I think that the thread here is going to be one, teaching students how to identify these problems and identify what can be done to solve them. And then, further, ideally 10, 15 years down the line, they keep these things in mind they learn in school, hey, here's a problem facing my community. I remember learning in high school how to organize, how to petition, and what are some ways that we can get involved to help solve these things instead of just saying, hey, this is Appalachia, this is the way it is, the way it's always going to be. So creating those leaders in the community after they leave school. And likewise, great educational leadership be a resource for finding scholarships and financial assistance. There are many scholarships from the Appalachian Regional Commission that help students in these areas or impoverished rural areas who are interested in attending university or trade school. So I think a great educational leader for these students would be to have a list of scholarships you can pull out in your back pocket. Hey, have you heard of this? Have you applied to this? Just finding things that students might not know about and having those resources available. Then finally, a lot of students, I'm from Mason County, not necessarily an Appalachian region. Once you get into Lewis County, the next county east, it's qualified as an Appalachian county under ARC. So a lot of these students have a real desire to escape the region and really never return, which of course if we're going to make some progress here, we need to kind of stop that brain drain, have students come back and really advocate for their communities and work in their communities towards some progress. But even so, if we have students that don't want to go to university, don't want to go to trade school, maybe encourage the Peace Corps, maybe encourage AmeriCorps. Hey, it's an opportunity if you get out, kind of serve communities across the country, maybe across the world, learn some valuable skills. Looks great on a resume and some things that you can come back here and have learned something and maybe use some of the stuff you learned in the Peace Corps, maybe learn some of the stuff that you use in the AmeriCorps, not to mention just a kind of an opportunity for them to travel. But the point here is having all these resources available and telling the students about them. Here's some things that are available for you. Here's some ideas that you might, be able to take some initiative on. It's going to help your situation, or just to give you some experiences even. The benevolence is of high expectations. So I think a lot of times as educators, we get students from maybe impoverished areas, urban, rural, whatever it might be, and we feel like, these students are having, all these troubles at home, and they come from this kind of rough environment, or a place of less privilege. So I'm gonna kind of expect less of them, take it easy on them because they're having all these difficulties, but it really does no good. As educators, we need to hold our students to high standards, particularly those that are from impoverished and rural areas, because I can assure you, to look at Kentucky in particular, the most expensive private school in the state, I'm sure, is holding their students to very high standards. Um, and really, those high standards, the ability to think critically, and to learn about the world around them, and things of that nature, is going to be maybe more important to students in these rural areas who are wholly reliant a lot of times on education to better their circumstances. So meaningful, challenging, direct instruction is critical for these students. So we need to hold them to high standards. The benevolence of high expectations is a saying I like a lot. Then, yep, finally, here, community engagement and outreach. Rural Appalachia, of course, suffers a variety of issues, many of which share a common thread, which is going to be poverty and a lack of opportunity. So what are some ways educators and students alike can combat the root of Appalachia's problems? And I think that's kind of what I'm getting here throughout all this, is creating those future community leaders as they leave school, and giving them those tools to make some progress in the area. It's one thing to, encourage the brain drain to a degree, and that's fine. There's going to be a lot of students that, you know, use education as that way to get out and make a better life for themselves somewhere else. But if we're gonna be in those communities as a leader, we need to look at what can we do to, 10, 15 years down the line to help solve some of these issues. And it comes down to opportunity, it comes down to poverty. So number one, again, like we mentioned, advocating for more equitable funding, and giving students ways to advocate for more equitable funding, teaching them how to reach out to their elected officials, how to, combat the injustice that happens around them. Maybe teach them about the labor history of Appalachia. What does that look like? What does it mean to kind of fight against exploitation? Um, bring in attention to college scholarships, having those available for students. Maybe finding some things that they wouldn't hear about otherwise. Have you applied to this one yet? And then again, encouraging programs like GSE, the Kentucky Government School for Entrepreneurs. There's a couple. There's a GSA, Government School for Arts, the GSP, which I don't remember what exactly that stands for, but it's for educational excellence, students that really excel academically. But I've highlighted GSE here in particular. Government School for Entrepreneurs. This is students that are interested in starting businesses and out there starting things that kind of really revamp that community, especially as coal kind of goes by the wayside even further. We need students to come back and start those businesses, and start those nonprofits, and really get things rolling, and working towards the community. So encouraging opportunities like that for students to grow, and be able to work towards progress, again, 10, 15 years down the line as they leave our schools. They can look back and say, hey, I had a teacher that encouraged me to go to GSE, and now I have this business idea. I'm going to come back to, whatever county, Harlan, whatever it might be. I'm going to start this business, and make some jobs that are not relying on coal. Speaking positively about the community, I think, is very important. Instilling that sense of community involvement, community awareness in our students. You know, not only being able to see past the stereotypes that kind of plague the region, but the students are not proud of the community, they're not really going to take a lot of initiative to make it better. So, speaking positively about it, and then creating opportunities to connect with the community to make it better, and even in little ways, if it can be picking up trash on the side of the road, or fundraising for families that maybe can't afford a Christmas gifts, whatever it might be. But creating those ties and those threads, and getting our students thinking community minded wise, community minded critical thinking. So what can I do to help my community, and why is my community facing these problems? Are going to be two of the big ones I think are really hit home for what it means to be an educational leader in these schools. And then finally, kind of wrapping it up, take time to present ideas about regional revitalization, and allow students to understand the issues facing the region, what alternatives might be available. Kind of planting seeds against brain drain and encouraging revitalization efforts. So once again, this is this is a way to say, hey, one, we've looked into the issues facing the region. We kind of understand to a degree everything that's kind of led Appalachia to this point. Well, what alternative exists for the future? We're not just going to give up and totally forget about it and things like that. What can we do to revitalize the area? And that can look like a number of things. Can we, is there opportunity for energy jobs to stay, but at alternative sources? So this could be, this is a little bit out of my economic, purview of knowledge, but can we create jobs for solar panels, or can we, West Virginia is really pushing their outdoor recreation kind of industry. So what kind of tourism opportunities are available here in Eastern Kentucky? And again, just getting students to really debate and think in the classroom about what the future of the region might be, what progress could be made. So, again, the 10, 15 years when they leave school, they come back and they're leaders in their community. They can remember, hey, I remember in high school we talked about, maybe this business would be good here. Maybe this initiative, maybe this nonprofit, and then they can go out and start to change things. So it's as a nutshell here, planting seeds in our students, uplifting the community, creating those community ties, giving them resources to go out, go to college, travel, volunteer, and then come back and attack the root of the problem, which is lack of opportunity and lack of resources. And then to end on, we was talking about leadership in rural Appalachian schools, but I think this really applies to any school or any community that you might serve. You always want to understand your students. You understand maybe the issues that are going on in the community. You always want to have those scholarships available, the resources available that students might not need. High expectations goes for everywhere. So I think while these things might be particularly applicable to Appalachia, they're applicable to any region. In the richest school in the county, richest district to the poorest, I think being a good educational leader kind of follows the same general path there. So that's my presentation on leadership in rural Appalachia. Thank you so much.